The orbital defenses of the Vakari homeworld were the most formidable in the galaxy. Built over centuries to protect the heart of an empire that had never known defeat, they lasted less than 4 hours. Admiral Park commanded the assault from the bridge of the Relentless, her voice calm and steady as she directed strike groups against targets that had been identified months in advance with intelligence provided by the coalition of species who had chosen to stand with humanity. The Vakari fleet scrambled to respond, but they had positioned their forces to defend against an attack from the outer system, not from directly above their capital. By the time they reorganized, human ships had already disabled the primary defensive platforms and established control of the orbital approaches. "Ground forces are deploying," her tactical officer reported. "First wave landing in the administrative district," Park nodded, watching the holographic display that showed thousands of drop pods descending through the atmosphere like a meteor shower. Captain Big Junho was in the lead pod, his company of Marines bracing for impact as they plunged toward the alien cityscape below. They hit the ground in the central plaza, just 3 kilometers from the building that housed the Dominion's high command. "All units advance," Beak ordered. "Secure the archives and capture any leadership targets that present themselves." The Vakari capital was a city of towering spires and underground complexes, designed to intimidate and impress visitors from across the galaxy. Today, it was a battlefield, its streets echoing with the sounds of combat as human soldiers pushed toward their objectives. The resistance was fierce at first, Dominion guards fighting desperately to protect their masters. But as word spread of what was happening, something unexpected began to occur. Vakari civilians started surrendering without being asked, emerging from buildings with their appendages raised in the universal gesture of non-resistance. Some of them had never supported their government's crimes. Others had simply accepted that the war was lost. And a few, Beak would learn later, had been waiting for this day for a very long time. High Commander Zektrus was in the command center when the first human soldiers breached the outer perimeter. He watched on security monitors as his personal guard fell one by one, their positions overwhelmed by attackers who moved with precision and purpose. "We need to destroy the archives," he ordered, reaching for the emergency purge controls. "Everything must be erased before they can access our records." But the controls did not respond to his commands. Someone had already locked him out of the system. And as Zektrus turned to find the source of this betrayal, he found himself facing a group of his own subordinates with weapons raised against him. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. One of them, a young officer named Chirith, who had served in the command center for years, stepped forward. "We have seen what you have done," Chirith said. "We have seen the facilities and the victims and the records that document centuries of horror committed in the name of Dominion prosperity." The officer's compound eyes were steady, showing no fear despite the magnitude of what he was doing. "Some of us have been copying those records for months," Chirith continued, "waiting for someone to come who would hold our leaders accountable." He lowered his weapon and stepped aside as human soldiers entered the room. "High Commander Zektrus," Captain Beak announced, "by the authority of the United Earth Government and the coalition of species who support our actions, you are under arrest for crimes against sentient life." Zektrus stared at the human soldier with pure hatred in his compound eyes. "You have no authority here," he spat. "This is Dominion territory, and the Council will never accept your interference in our internal affairs." Beak smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The Council's opinion no longer matters," he replied. "What matters is that you will face justice for what you have done on Asherus Prime." The delegates of the Galactic Council watched the live broadcast of Vakari leadership being taken into custody. Chairman Select Tau had not spoken since the human assault began, his silver scales dull with exhaustion and something that looked very much like shame. Councillor Venn stood and addressed the chamber. "We have all witnessed what has happened here today," he said, his crystalline body glowing with the bright white of clarity. The humans did what we should have done centuries ago. And they did it despite our sanctions and our mandates and our demands that they respect an order that did not deserve respect. He turned to face the assembled delegates, many of whom could not meet his gaze. The Vakari archives have been secured, he continued. They contain records of crimes committed against citizens of at least 23 council member species. Murmurs of shock and anger rippled through the chamber. We have a choice to make, Ven declared. We can continue to pretend that the old order was just and legitimate, or we can acknowledge our failures and build something better. Premier Yunhei 1 arrived on Asherus Prime 3 days later, not as a supplicant seeking forgiveness, but as an equal demanding change. She addressed the Galactic Council from the central speaking platform, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of every being in that ancient chamber. I did not come here to ask for your approval, she began. What we did was necessary, and I would do it again without hesitation. She paused, letting her words settle over the assembly. But I also did not come here to make enemies, she continued. I came here to offer a different path forward. She outlined humanity's proposal, a new charter for the Galactic Council that would establish transparent governance, protect the rights of all sentient beings, and create a mutual defense pact that actually meant something. No more looking away, Yoon said. No more allowing the powerful to prey on the weak, because confronting them would be inconvenient. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who had supported sanctions against her people just weeks earlier. We can build this together, she said. Or we can remain divided while the galaxy continues to suffer from the kind of injustice that the Vakari represented. The vote was unanimous, not because every delegate agreed with everything humanity had done, but because they recognized that the old way had failed, and that pretending otherwise was no longer possible in the weeks that followed. The galaxy began to change. War crimes tribunals were established to process the Vakari leadership and anyone else who had participated in the neural harvesting operations. Survivors were reunited with families who had never stopped hoping, and memorial services were held for those who had not survived. The Vakari Dominion was dissolved, its territory divided among species who agreed to rebuild under the new charter, and its military apparatus was dismantled with human oversight. Admiral Park returned to Earth as a hero, though she insisted that the true heroes were the soldiers who had fought and died. To make this victory possible, she attended every memorial service, spoke at every ceremony, and made sure that no one forgot the cost of what they had achieved. Premier Yoon served 3 more terms before retiring to write her memoirs, a book that would become required reading in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. She spent her final years advocating for continued reform of the Council's institutions, always pushing for more transparency and more accountability. Councillor Ven became the first non-human to address the United Nations General Assembly, speaking about the lessons the galaxy had learned from humanity's defiance. You taught us something important, he said, his crystalline body glowing with the warm colors of friendship and respect. You taught us that some principles are worth fighting for, even when the cost seems unbearable. And in a small office on Earth, Captain Beek Junho sat with a young Vakari named Chirith, the officer who had helped secure the archives and bring his own leaders to justice. Why did you do it? Beek asked. Why betray everything you had been raised to believe in? Chirith was silent for a long moment, his compound eyes reflecting the light of Earth's sun streaming through the window. Because I saw what my people had become, he finally answered, and I did not want to be part of it anymore. He looked at the human soldier, who had become something like a friend over the months of joint operations and reconstruction work. Your species has a saying, Chirith continued, that evil triumphs when good people do nothing. Beek nodded. Recognizing the quote, I decided to do something, Chirith said, because of you. because humans showed me that it was possible to stand against the darkness even when everyone else looked away. Beak reached out and placed his hand on the Valkyrie's appendage in a gesture of solidarity that would have been unthinkable. Just a year earlier, that is what we do, he said. We stand up, we fight back, and we never stop believing that tomorrow can be better than today. Outside the window, the sun continued to shine on a world that had reached across the stars and changed the destiny of a galaxy, not because humans were stronger or smarter than anyone else, but because they refused to accept that cruelty and injustice were simply the way things had to be. The galaxy had demanded a ceasefire, humanity had delivered justice. Instead, and nothing would ever be the same. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council had become a battleground of words and accusations, and Chairman Selectau could no longer pretend that he controlled the proceedings. 3 weeks had passed since Operation Thunderbreak began, and in that time the political landscape of the galaxy had shifted more dramatically than in the previous 3 centuries. The Marvati delegation sat in uncomfortable silence as representatives from a dozen species demanded answers about missing citizens and vanished colony ships. The Lithori had withdrawn from the Sanctions Coalition on the second day, their crystalline bodies glowing with the deep violet of moral outrage. Now the Solani, the Varathi, and 6 other minor powers had followed their example. Cherexka stood at the central speaking platform, his compound eyes darting nervously between hostile faces that would have shown him deference just weeks earlier. The allegations against the Dominion are based entirely on human propaganda, he insisted, his mandibles clicking with diminishing confidence. These so-called facilities were research installations studying neural diseases, and the humans have deliberately misrepresented their purpose. Councillor Venn rose from his seat, his body shifting to the cold blue of barely contained anger. Research installations, he repeated, his musical voice carrying an edge that few had ever heard from a Lithori diplomat. Research installations that contained citizens of 18 different species, held against their will, with tubes extracting their neural tissue. He stepped forward, and the chamber fell silent. I personally verified the evidence that Admiral Park presented to me, he continued. I examined the genetic records, the operational logs, and the testimony of survivors who describe horrors that should not exist in any civilized galaxy. Cherexka tried to interrupt, but Venn raised a crystalline hand that flashed with inner fire. The Dominion has been committing atrocities against sentient beings for at least 400 years, Venn declared. And the council did nothing because the Valkyrie were powerful and their victims were not. The chamber erupted into shouting, with delegates from Valkyrie-allied species defending the Dominion and others demanding immediate action. Chairman Selectau struck his staff against the floor repeatedly, but his authority had eroded beyond recovery. In a secure room far below the Grand Chamber, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Admiral Park's holographic image flickered slightly as she addressed the assembled representatives of the species who had chosen to support humanity's war counselor. Terra of the Solani sat at the head of the table, her feathers arranged in patterns of cautious optimism. The intelligence you provided was accurate, Park reported. Our strike teams have destroyed 14 additional facilities in the past week, and we have rescued over 2,000 survivors. The Varathi delegate, a weathered commander named Gresh, studied the tactical displays floating above the table. Your forces are spread thin, he observed. The Dominion still has substantial fleet assets, and they are beginning to concentrate for a counteroffensive. We know, Park acknowledged, which is why we need to discuss the next phase of our operation. She touched a control, and a new image appeared. The Valkyrie homeworld, surrounded by defensive installations and protected by the largest concentration of warships in the galaxy. Our intelligence indicates that the Dominion's primary command center is located in the capital city, Park explained. This is where all operational decisions are made, where the records of their crimes are stored, and where the leadership that authorized centuries of atrocities continues to direct the war. Tara's feathers rippled with concern. You are proposing an assault on the Vakari homeworld, she said. That is unprecedented in galactic history. So is what they have done, Park replied. And so is what they will continue to do if we allow them to survive. The Varathi commander leaned forward, his forearms folded in a gesture of serious consideration. Even with our support, the combined fleet strength available to you is insufficient for a direct assault, Gresh said. The Dominion's orbital defenses alone would destroy half your ships before you reach the surface. Park nodded. And there was something in her expression that made the assembled representatives suddenly uneasy. That is why we are not going to make a direct assault, she said. We are going to make them think we are retreating. The plan she outlined over the next hour was audacious, unconventional, and carried risks that would have made any traditional military strategist extremely uncomfortable. But it was also exactly the kind of plan that the Vakari would never expect, because it relied on capabilities and tactics that no other species in the galaxy possessed. Humanity's greatest military advantage had never been their weapons or their ships. It had been their willingness to do whatever was necessary, regardless of the cost, on the Vakari homeworld. High Commander Zectrus reviewed the latest intelligence reports with growing satisfaction. The humans were finally pulling back, their forces consolidating after weeks of scattered strikes that had caused significant damage but failed to deliver a decisive blow. They've overextended themselves, his subordinate reported. Our analysts project that they will require at least 2 months to reorganize before they can mount another major offensive. Zectrus clicked his mandibles in approval. That gives us time to reinforce our remaining facilities and eliminate the traitor species, who have been providing them with intelligence. He had already received reports of human ships withdrawing from forward positions across multiple systems, their aggressive posture suddenly replaced by the cautious movements of an exhausted force. The Council's sanctions were finally beginning to bite, cutting the humans off from the trade networks and resources they needed to sustain their campaign. Order our fleet commanders to prepare for counter-offensive operations, Zectrus commanded. We will strike their colonial territories while they are weak and remind the galaxy what happens to those who challenge the Dominion. But even as he issued these orders, something was happening that his intelligence services had failed to detect. The human ships that appeared to be withdrawing were actually repositioning, moving through routes that the Vakari had never bothered to patrol because they led nowhere strategically important, or so they had always believed. Admiral Park watched from the Relentless as her scattered forces converged on their true destination, a system that the Vakari had abandoned centuries ago, deemed worthless because it contained nothing but dead planets and asteroid fields. What the Dominion did not know was that humanity had been quietly building infrastructure in this system for months, hidden outposts and supply depots that would allow their fleet to refuel and rearm without returning to their home territories. All strike groups have arrived and are beginning resupply operations, her tactical officer reported. We will be ready to move within 72 hours, Park nodded, her eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the Vakari homeworld. The Dominion believed they were retreating. They had no idea that humanity was about to deliver the final blow on Asherus Prime. The Galactic Council convened for what Chairman Selleck Tau hoped would be the last emergency session for a while. The humans had apparently exhausted themselves. The sanctions were working, and perhaps now the galaxy could return to something resembling normal. He was in the middle of a carefully prepared speech about the importance of galactic unity when an aide rushed into the chamber with an urgent message. Select Tao read the message, and his silver scales went completely pale. "Chairman," Churek Ska called out. Noticing the Morvathi's reaction, "What is happening?" Select Tao looked up, and there was something in his eyes that silenced the entire chamber. "The humans," he said slowly, "are not retreating." He activated the chamber's display system, and a tactical image appeared showing the Rekari home system. 300 human warships had just emerged from faster-than-light transit, not at the edge of the system where defensive forces were concentrated, but directly above the home world itself. They had found a way through the Dominion's defenses, a route that should have been impossible. And now they were positioned to strike at the heart of Rekari power. Cherekska stared at the display, his compound eyes wide with disbelief. "How?" he demanded. "How did they get past our defenses?" No one in the chamber had an answer, because no one had ever seen anything like this before. The humans had done the impossible. And now the entire galaxy was about to witness what happened when humanity decided that a wrong must be made right. Whatever the cost, whatever it took, the final battle had begun. The first strike came at dawn on Rekari Prime, when the orbital defense platforms detected 300 human vessels emerging from faster-than-light transit at the edge of the system. Admiral Park watched from the bridge of the Relentless as her fleet arranged itself into attack formation, each ship knowing its role in the carefully choreographed dance of destruction that was about to begin. "All strike groups report ready," her tactical officer announced. "Operation Thunderbreak is go on your command." Admiral Park looked at the display showing the Rekari homeworld, a massive planet wrapped in clouds of industrial pollution and surrounded by rings of military installations. This was not her target today. The Dominion's heart would fall eventually. But first, she needed to cut off its limbs. Execute Phase 1. She ordered across 12 systems. Human forces struck simultaneously. Small groups of fast corvettes hit supply convoys, destroying cargo ships loaded with weapons and ammunition before they could reach the front lines. Destroyer squadrons targeted communication relays, severing the links between Dominion commanders and their scattered forces, and marine assault teams descended on facilities that the Rekari had hidden in the darkest corners of their territory. Installations that processed living beings like raw materials and extracted the essence of consciousness itself on the planet Kethrus 4. Captain Beek Junho led his company through the corridors of a facility built deep beneath the frozen surface. The walls were lined with the same cylindrical tanks they had found on Varan 3, each one containing a victim suspended in preservation fluid, recording everything. His communication specialist confirmed, broadcasting on all open frequencies. This was the key to Admiral Park's strategy. The Rekari had hidden their crimes for centuries, but humanity was going to drag every horror into the light where the entire galaxy could see. "Captain," one of his soldiers called out, "we have survivors in the secondary wing, but there are Rekari guards holding position around them." Beek moved his company forward with practiced efficiency, clearing corridors and eliminating resistance with the brutal competence that human special forces had developed over generations of conflict on Earth and beyond. The guards fought desperately, knowing what discovery of this facility would mean for their masters. But they were facing soldiers who had seen too many victims to feel anything resembling mercy. When the last defender fell, Beek entered the secondary wing and found what he had feared: hundreds of tanks. But these contained beings who were still being processed. Tubes ran from their skulls to machines that hummed with terrible purpose, slowly extracting whatever the Rekari valued from the minds of their captives. "Medical teams to my position," Beek said into his communicator. "Priority evacuation, all survivors on Earth." Premier Yumhei 1 stood before the United Nations General Assembly with the bearing of someone who had accepted the weight of history on her shoulders. "Citizens of Earth and our colonies," she began, I address you today with full knowledge of the consequences that our actions will bring." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the assembled delegates. "The Galactic Council has voted to impose sanctions on our territories," she continued. "They have authorized military support for the Vakari Dominion, and they have declared our refusal to accept their ceasefire mandate a violation of galactic law." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, but Yoon raised her hand for silence. "I accept these consequences," she said. "I accept them because the alternative was unacceptable." Behind her, screens flickered to life, showing images and footage that made seasoned diplomats turn pale. "This is what the Vakari have been doing for centuries," Yoon explained, her voice steady despite the horror displayed behind her. "They have preyed on isolated colonies and vulnerable travelers across council space, taking living beings and processing them like livestock." She stepped forward, her eyes sweeping across the assembly. "The council knew," she said. "Maybe not every detail, but they knew enough to look away. Because the Vakari were powerful and their victims were weak." The screens changed to show human soldiers liberating facilities, carrying survivors to safety, and providing medical care to beings who had been given up for lost. "We will not look away," Yoon declared. "We cannot look away because we remember what it was like to be alone in the darkness, afraid that no one would come to help us." She turned to face the cameras that would broadcast her words across the galaxy. "To the Galactic Council, I say this: your sanctions will hurt us, but they will not stop us. Because some things matter more than economic prosperity or political convenience." Her voice grew stronger, carrying the conviction of a species that had clawed its way up from the mud of a single planet to reach the stars. "To the Vakari Dominion, I say this: surrender now, face justice for your crimes, and perhaps you will survive as a people. But if you continue this war, we will hunt you to the last ship and the last soldier until no facility remains standing and no victim remains in your hands." And then she turned to address someone else entirely, someone the galaxy had not expected her to acknowledge. "To the survivors," she said, her voice softening. "To everyone who was taken and forgotten, everyone who thought no one was coming, I want you to know that we see you. We are fighting for you, and we will not rest until you are free." The transmission ended, and across council space, billions of beings sat in stunned silence. The humans had just declared war on the established order of the galaxy, and they had done it in the name of victims that no one else had cared enough to protect on Asherus Prime. The Galactic Council erupted into chaos. Delegates from 3 species immediately demanded investigations into missing colony ships and unexplained disappearances from their own territories. The Lithori Collective formally withdrew from the Sanctions Coalition, citing moral objections that their cultural code would not allow them to ignore, even among the Vakari's traditional allies. There were whispers of doubt and second thoughts. Chirexka watched his carefully constructed political position crumble with every passing hour. The humans had not just attacked his people's military and destroyed their hidden facilities. They had attacked something far more vulnerable: the Dominion's reputation. For centuries, the Vakari had maintained their position through a combination of military strength and political maneuvering, convincing the galaxy that they were civilized members of the interstellar community. Now everyone could see the truth. Broadcast in high definition across every network and data channel in council space. The ambassador tried to claim the evidence was fabricated, but independent verification teams were already confirming human findings. He tried to argue that these were isolated incidents, the work of rogue elements within Dominion territory. But the scale of the facilities and the centuries of operational records made such claims laughable, and worst of all, the humans had done something that Chirexka had never anticipated. They had made themselves heroes on worlds that had lost citizens to Vakari predation. Humans were being celebrated as liberators and protectors, species that had long resented council. Authority saw in humanity a champion, willing to challenge the established order, even within the Dominion's own subject races. There were stirrings of hope that the ancient regime might finally be overthrown. Admiral Park received reports of these developments aboard the Relentless, as her fleet continued its systematic destruction of Rakari military assets. She allowed herself no satisfaction. Because the war was far from over, the Dominion still possessed substantial forces, and the Council had not completely abandoned its support. There would be more battles, more casualties, and more difficult decisions ahead. But as she watched footage of survivors being reunited with families who had given them up for dead, she felt something she had not experienced since the war began. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it, the belief that what they were doing mattered, that the sacrifices her people were making would mean something when the fighting finally ended. Her communications officer interrupted her. "Thoughts, Admiral? We have an incoming transmission on a secure channel," he reported. "The encryption signature is unfamiliar, but the source appears to be within Council space." Park frowned. "Put it through." A face appeared on the screen. Features that Park recognized from intelligence briefings. It was the Solani representative to the Galactic Council, her iridescent feathers arranged in a pattern that indicated serious intent. "Admiral Park," the Solani said, "my name is Counselor Terra, and I represent a coalition of species who believe the Council has made a terrible mistake." Park leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "I am listening." "Counselor, we have information that may be useful to your campaign," Terra continued. "Fleet positions, facility locations, and political intelligence that could accelerate the end of this conflict. And what do you want in return?" The Solani's feathers shifted to a pattern that conveyed determination and hope. "We want your word that when this war is over, humanity will support reform of the Council's power structure," she said. "We want a galaxy where the strong cannot prey on the weak simply because they have the power to do so." Admiral Park considered the offer for a long moment. Then she smiled, and for the first time since the war began, there was warmth in it. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council had stood for 12,000 years, its walls carved from the living rock of Asherus Prime and decorated with the symbols of every species that had ever held membership. Today, those walls seemed to tremble with tension as delegates shouted at each other. Across the ascending tiers, Chairman Selik Tau, an elderly Mavati with silver scales and tired eyes, struck his ceremonial staff against the floor in a desperate attempt to restore order. "Delegates, please," he called out, his voice amplified by the ancient acoustic systems built into the chamber. "We must maintain civilized discourse." The Vakari ambassador Chirek Ska rose from his seat, his compound eyes gleaming with barely contained fury. "There can be no civilized discourse while the humans continue their campaign of terror against my people," he declared. "They have rejected our ceasefire mandate, and they must face consequences." Murmurs of agreement rippled through certain sections of the chamber, particularly among species that had long allied themselves with the Dominion. The Kralith delegate, a hulking reptilian with ceremonial scars across his snout, pounded his fist against his seat. "The humans have grown too bold," he growled. "They forget that they are newcomers to this galaxy, and they must learn their place among the elder races." Councillor Venn sat in his designated position among the Lithori delegation, his crystalline body cycling through troubled shades of gray and purple. The images that Admiral Park had shown him still haunted his thoughts, but he had returned to find the council unwilling to listen. "Chairman," he said, rising to request recognition, "I have evidence that the council must consider before taking any action against the human governments." Selik Tau nodded wearily, grateful for any voice of moderation. The chamber recognizes Counselor Ven of the Lithori Collective. Ven moved to the central speaking platform, his body glowing with the soft blue of peaceful intent. During my visit to the human flagship, Admiral Park shared intelligence files documenting Rakari activities that violate every principle of galactic law. He activated the display system, and the same images that Park had shown him appeared floating above the chamber floor. Gasps and exclamations erupted from several delegations as they saw the tanks filled with suspended beings, the surgical equipment designed for neural extraction, and the mass graves that stretched across frozen landscapes. These facilities were discovered on worlds recently liberated by human forces. Van continued. The victims include members of at least 18 different species, several of which hold seats in this very chamber. Cherekska's mandibles clicked rapidly in agitation. "This is fabricated propaganda," he shouted. "The humans have created false evidence to justify their aggression. I witnessed independent verification protocols being applied to this data." Ven replied calmly, "The chain of custody is clear, and the genetic samples recovered from the victims match missing persons." Reports from across council space. The chamber descended into chaos. The Marvathi chairman struck his staff repeatedly, but no one was listening anymore. Species were turning to each other with questions and accusations. Old alliances fracturing as the implications of the evidence became clear in a quiet corner of the chamber. A group of junior delegates from smaller species watched the proceedings with carefully neutral expressions. The Solani representative, a slender being with iridescent feathers, leaned toward her colleague from the Varathi consortium. "The humans knew this would happen," she whispered. "They are not just fighting a war, they are dismantling the Dominion's political support." The Varathi delegate, a stocky creature with 4 arms and a face like weathered stone, nodded slowly. "Our intelligence services have been tracking human fleet movements," he replied in an equally quiet voice. "They are not positioning for retreat or defense." "What are they doing?" The Varathi hesitated before answering. "They are spreading out," he said, dispersing into hundreds of small strike groups across 12 systems. The Solani's feathers rippled with concern. "That contradicts every principle of conventional warfare," she said. "Concentration of force is essential for major offensives." "Perhaps," the Varathi agreed, "unless you are not planning a conventional offensive on the main floor." Chairman Selek Tao had finally restored a semblance of order. "The evidence presented by Counselor Ven will be examined by our independent verification committee," he announced. "Until that examination is complete, we must proceed with the matter at hand." Cherekska seized the opportunity to redirect the conversation. "The humans have defied a lawful mandate of this council," he said, his voice carrying the righteous indignation of a practiced politician. "Whatever crimes they claim to have discovered do not excuse their refusal to honor galactic law." Several delegates nodded in agreement, particularly those whose trade agreements with the Dominion made neutrality politically convenient. "I move that we proceed with the implementation of economic sanctions against all human territories." Cherekska continued, "And I further move that we authorize military support for Dominion forces engaged in defensive operations." The Krulith delegate seconded the motion with enthusiastic thumping of his scaled fists. Chairman Selek Tao called for a vote, and the chamber grew quiet as delegates considered their positions. The results appeared on the central display. 31 in favor, 12 opposed, 4 abstaining. The sanctions had passed, and the Vrekari would receive military support from council members willing to provide it. Cherekska allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, his compound eyes gleaming with triumph. The humans had overplayed their hand, and now they would learn the cost of defying the established order. But as delegates began to file out of the chamber, congratulating themselves on maintaining galactic stability, Something was happening in the intelligence division, 3 levels. Below, junior analysts stared at their screens with growing alarm as data streams from across Council space painted a picture that none of them had expected. "Alert the chairman," the lead analyst said, a voice tight with barely controlled urgency. "The humans are moving." "Moving where?" her colleague asked. She pulled up a tactical display that showed the positions of every tracked human vessel across 12 systems. They were everywhere. Small groups of ships had appeared at dozens of locations simultaneously, striking Vakari supply convoys, communication relays, and installations that intelligence services had not even known existed. "They are not retreating," the analyst said. "They are attacking everything at once." The colleague leaned closer to the screen, his face pale. "How is that possible?" he demanded. "They do not have enough ships to sustain operations across this many fronts." "Apparently, they do," the analyst replied. "And look at these target coordinates." She highlighted several locations on the display. "These are the same type of facilities shown in the evidence that Counselor Venn presented," she said. "The humans are not just fighting the Dominion's military. They are systematically destroying every neural harvesting operation in Vakari space." The colleague was silent for a long moment. "The council just voted to sanction them," he finally said. "They just authorized military support for the Vakari." "I know. The humans must have known this would happen," he continued. "They must have planned for it." The analyst nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. "They were never going to accept the ceasefire," she said. "They used the diplomatic delay to position their forces, and they used Counselor Venn's presentation to plant doubt among the council members. But why provoke sanctions?" the colleague asked. "Why make enemies of the entire council?" The analyst thought about the images she had seen in the intelligence briefings. The tanks filled with suspended beings and the surgical equipment designed for horrors beyond imagination. "Because they do not care about the sanctions," she said. "They care about ending this, whatever it costs." Above them, in the Grand Chamber, Chairman Selek Tao was receiving the first reports of the human offensive. His silver scales had gone pale, and his staff trembled slightly in his grip. The vote had been cast, the decision had been made, and the council had committed itself to supporting the Vakari Dominion. But as he looked at the tactical displays showing human ships striking targets across half the galaxy, he began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. The humans were not backing down. They were not negotiating. They were not behaving the way any rational species should behave when faced with the combined displeasure of 47 governments. They were simply hitting harder, faster, and with a coordination that suggested months of careful planning. And somewhere in the depths of his ancient, politically cautious mind, Chairman Selek Tao felt the first stirrings of fear. Not fear of what the humans might do to the Vakari, fear of what they might do to everyone who stood in their way. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called at the worst possible time, and every delegate in the Grand Chamber knew exactly who was to blame. Admiral Park Su Jin stood on the bridge of the United Earth Fleet flagship Relentless, watching the transmission feed from Asherus Prime with cold and steady eyes. 47 species had gathered in that ancient hall, their representatives arranged in ascending tiers of crystalline seats that caught the light of 3 artificial suns. The Vakari ambassador, a tall insectoid creature named Chirexka, was speaking with theatrical outrage about human aggression and violations of galactic law. "The humans have shown themselves to be a violent and unstable species," Chirexka declared, his mandibles clicking with each syllable. "They refuse to honor the protocols of civilized warfare, and they have caused untold suffering across 12 systems in their reckless campaign against the Dominion." Park almost laughed at that untold suffering. She turned away from the transmission and walked to the tactical display where holographic images floated in the air like ghosts. These were the images her troops had captured during the liberation of Variant 3 just 6 days ago. Mass graves stretching across kilometers of frozen ground, underground facilities filled with equipment that no civilized species should ever build. Survivors who stared at their rescuers with empty eyes, their minds damaged beyond any hope of full recovery. The Ricari had been harvesting neural tissue from living beings, extracting memories and consciousness itself for purposes that remained unclear, and now they wanted a ceasefire. Admiral, her communications officer, called out. "We have an incoming diplomatic shuttle requesting permission to dock." "Let me guess," Park said without turning around. "Councillor Venn." "Yes, Admiral." She had expected this. The Lithari were the Council's preferred messengers for delicate matters, and Venn was their most skilled diplomat. His crystalline body could shift colors to convey emotion, and his species was known throughout the galaxy for their patience and their ability to find compromise in any situation. But there would be no compromise here. Park allowed the shuttle to dock and met Venn in the main conference room, where the images from Variant 3 still floated in the air. The Lithari counselor entered with graceful steps, his body glowing a soft blue that indicated peaceful intentions. "Admiral Park," he said in his musical voice, "I bring greetings from the Galactic Council and a formal mandate that I am required to deliver in person." "I know why you are here," Park replied, gesturing for him to sit. "The Council wants us to stop fighting." Venn settled into a chair designed for species of his size, and his colors shifted to a gentle purple. "The Council has voted to impose an immediate ceasefire in all territories currently under dispute between the United Earth Government and the Ricari Dominion," he explained. "This mandate is backed by the full authority of galactic law, and failure to comply will result in economic sanctions and potential military intervention." Park nodded slowly, her face revealing nothing. "And what exactly have the Ricari told the Council about this war?" Venn's colors flickered with uncertainty. "They have filed formal grievances claiming excessive force, targeting of civilian infrastructure, and psychological warfare tactics that violate the conventions of civilized conflict." "Psychological warfare," Park repeated. "That is an interesting way to describe what we have been doing." She touched the control panel, and the holographic images shifted to show a recording from 2 weeks earlier. Human soldiers were moving through a Ricari facility, their weapons raised, their faces covered by tactical masks. They entered a large chamber filled with cylindrical tanks, each one containing a living being suspended in pale green fluid. Tubes ran from their skulls to machines that hummed with a low and terrible sound. "We found this facility on Korath 7, Park said quietly. There were 342 victims inside, representing 18 different species. Venn's crystalline body flickered through several colors in rapid succession, settling on a deep and troubled gray. 43 of them were still alive when we arrived, Park continued. We saved 27, but most of them will never fully recover. She touched the controls again, and a new image appeared. "This is a Morvathi child," she said, 7 years old by their calendar, taken from a colony transport that supposedly disappeared in a navigation accident 12 years ago. Vin stared at the image, and his colors had gone completely still. "The Ricari have been doing this for centuries," Park explained. "They target isolated colonies, ships traveling through remote space, and anyone else who will not be missed." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on the Lithori diplomat. "And now the Council wants us to stop fighting so that the Ricari can relocate their facilities and destroy the evidence." Ven was silent for a long moment. "Admiral," he finally said, "I am deeply disturbed by what you have shown me, and I will include this evidence in my report to the Council." "But," Park said, already knowing what came next, "but the mandate must be honored." then continued, his voice carrying genuine regret. The Vrekari have been members of the Council for 800 years, and humanity has been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. He paused, and his colors shifted to something like sympathy. I understand your anger, Admiral, but the Council's authority must be respected, or the entire system of galactic law will collapse. Park stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars that stretched endlessly in all directions. Counselor Venn, she said, I want you to take a message back to the Council for me. Of course, Admiral. She turned to face him, and there was something in her eyes that made the Lithori's colors flicker with instinctive caution. Tell them that humanity did not travel across the void between stars to find monsters, and then stand aside while those monsters prey on the innocent. Her voice was calm and steady, but there was an edge of steel beneath the words. Tell them that we have seen what the Vrekari do to their victims, and we will not stop until every facility is destroyed and every survivor is freed. Venn rose from his chair, his body now glowing a concerned orange. Admiral, I urge you to reconsider, he said. The consequences of defying the Council could be severe, and humanity cannot stand alone against the combined might of 47 species. Park smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We are already alone, Counselor, she replied. We've been alone since the day we discovered what the Vrekari were doing, and the Council refused to act. She pressed a button on her console. My staff will escort you back to your shuttle, she said. I suggest you leave quickly, because we will be moving to a new position within the hour. Venn hesitated at the door, his colors cycling through confusion and concern. What are you planning, Admiral? Park looked at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering to care about diplomatic consequences anymore. I am planning to do what the Council should have done centuries ago, she said. I am going to end this. The Lithori diplomat left without another word, and Park watched his shuttle depart from the viewport of her ready room when it had vanished into the darkness of space. She opened a secure channel to Earth Command. This is Admiral Park aboard the Relentless, she said. Patch me through to Premier Yoon immediately. The connection took only seconds to establish, and the face of humanity's leader appeared on the screen. Admiral, the Premier said, I received the Council's mandate, and I assume you have spoken with their messenger. I have, Park confirmed. They want us to stop. Premier Yoon-hae-won was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had guided humanity through 3 major crises in the past decade. And what did you tell them? She asked. Park straightened her shoulders and met her leader's gaze through the screen. I told them no. The Premier was silent for a moment, and then a small smile crossed her face. Good, she said, because I have new orders for you, Admiral, and I think you are going to like them. Park listened as the Premier outlined the plan that would come to be known as Operation Thunderbreak. And for the first time in months, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. The Council wanted a ceasefire. Humanity was going to give them something else entirely.